Hey there, welcome. I'm here to help you relax tonight. So before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It really makes us feel like the global community it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's begin our evening together. Story 4. Whispers from the Attic. The house on Oak Lane was a steal. A Victorian-era beauty with stained glass windows, a wraparound porch, and a price tag that seemed like a typo. My wife, Sarah, fell in love instantly. I was more pragmatic. A house this old, this large for so little? There had to be a catch. The real estate agent, a woman with a smile as polished as the hardwood floors, was evasive. The previous owners had to relocate suddenly. Family emergency. They're very motivated to sell. She avoided eye contact when she said it. We bought it. Sarah saw potential and charm. I saw dry rot and outdated wiring. But even I had to admit, the place had character. Until the whispers started. It began on our first night. We were exhausted from moving, surrounded by towers of boxes. As we drifted off to sleep in the cavernous master bedroom, I heard it. A faint, sibilant sound, like radio static from a distant station. But beneath the static, there were voices. Too many to distinguish, all talking at once, a chaotic murmur. "Sarah, do you hear that?" I whispered. She was already half asleep. "Hear what?" "The house settling." "It's old, Ben. Go to sleep." But it wasn't the house settling. The whispers became a nightly ritual. They seemed to emanate from the walls, from the floorboards, but most strongly from the ceiling. From the attic. The attic hatch was in the hallway ceiling, a square of painted wood with a small pull cord. We hadn't ventured up there yet. The agent had said it was empty, just insulation and dust. After a week of sleepless nights, I had to know. I got the ladder from the garage, unfolded it under the hatch, and pulled the cord. The door swung down with a groan, releasing a puff of cold, dry air that smelled of ancient wood and something else, something metallic, like old pennies. I climbed up, my flashlight beam cutting a swath through the oppressive darkness. The agent was right. It was empty, vast, empty, and freezing cold, despite the summer heat outside. The floor was layered with dust so thick it felt like snow under my boots. But in the center of the floor, the dust was disturbed. A path had been walked through it, recently, leading to the far wall. My heart hammered against my ribs. I followed the path, my flashlight beam trembling. The path ended at the wall. There was nothing there, just bare, whitewashed boards. I ran my hand over the wood. It was ice cold, and then I felt it. A faint vibration, and the whispers were louder here, clearer. I could almost make out words. "Find US. The coal. Wrong place." I stumbled back, scrambling down the ladder, my breath pluming in the suddenly frigid air of the hallway. I slammed the attic hatch shut and didn't tell Sarah what I'd found. The phenomena escalated. Doors would open and close by themselves. Small items, keys, spoons, photographs, would disappear for days, only to reappear in plain sight on the kitchen table. The cold spots multiplied, moving through the house like roaming ghosts. Sarah finally heard the whispers one night. She shot upright in bed, her face pale in the moonlight. "Ben," she gasped, her hand clutching my arm. "I hear them. They're saying my name." We tried to ignore it. We rationalized. Old pipes, wind in the eaves. But the fear was a constant, low hum in our lives, a second heartbeat of dread. The breaking point was the photograph. It was an old Polaroid, one we'd never seen before. It showed a family, a man, a woman, and 2 young girls, standing on our porch, smiling. They were dressed in clothes from the 70s. But their smiles were wrong, strained. Their eyes were wide with terror. Scrawled on the white border at the bottom, in a shaky handwriting, were the words, "Help US. We are still here." It was placed on our pillow while we slept. We called a priest. He walked through the house, sprinkling holy water, his lips moving in silent prayer. He stopped at the attic hatch. "There's a great deal of sorrow here," he said, his face grim. "A presence. Many presences. They're trapped. They're trying to communicate." He refused to go into the attic. "Some doors," he said, "are better left closed." That night, the whispers became screams. Agonized, terrified shrieks that seemed to come from every corner of the house. The attic hatch rattled violently, as if something was trying to pound its way out. We fled to a hotel, but we couldn't stay there forever. We had to know. We had to understand what was in our house. I went back during the day, armed with a crowbar and a desperate need for answers. I climbed into the attic. The cold was worse. The whispers were a constant, angry buzz. I went to the far wall, to the spot where the path in the dust led. I started prying at the boards. The wood was old, brittle. It splintered easily. Behind the first board was another, and then another. I was tearing down the wall, and then my crowbar hit empty space. A cold, damp draft flowed out from the gap. I pulled away more boards, my hands bleeding, my breath ragged. There was a room, a secret room, walled off from the rest of the attic. And it was not empty. The smell hit me first. It was the smell from my first time in the attic, but 1,000 times stronger. Damp earth, rot, and that coppery tang of old blood. My flashlight beam pierced the darkness, shaking violently in my grip. The room was small, perhaps 6 by 6 feet. The walls were bare, rough timber. The floor was packed dirt, and in the center of the room sat a small, wooden table and 2 chairs. On the table was a Ouija board. It wasn't a mass-produced board from a toy store. It was handmade, carved from a dark wood, the letters and numbers burned into the surface. The planchette was a simple, heart-shaped piece of wood with a cloudy glass viewer in the center. It looked ancient. Scattered around the table and the floor were other objects. Melted candles, their wax pooled into grotesque shapes. Drawings, crude and childish, depicting stick figures screaming, their mouths black voids. And bones. Small, delicate animal bones, arranged in intricate, circular patterns. This was no simple haunting. This was a place of ritual, a prison. The whispers in the attic weren't just echoes. They were a direct broadcast from this room. They swirled around me now, no longer faint, but loud, desperate, overlapping. Let us out. She lied to us. The door is closed. Find the rest of us. I backed away, my stomach churning. I had to get out. I had to call the police. This was beyond a priest. This was a crime scene. As I turned to flee, my flashlight beam swept across the far wall of the secret room. Something was etched into the wood. I forced myself to look closer. It was a family tree, but it was wrong. The names were connected by lines that twisted and crossed over each other in a chaotic web. Dates of birth were there, but the dates of death were all the same. October 31st, 1978. The year the family in the Polaroid would have vanished. And at the bottom of the tree, carved deeper than the rest, was a single name, Agnes. And beneath it, a phrase, "She keeps US here." I stumbled out of the attic, down the ladder, and vomited onto the hallway floor. I called the police, my words tumbling over each other. I told them about the room, the bones, the date. 2 officers arrived. They were skeptical until I led them up the ladder and showed them the broken wall. Their flashlights played over the scene. The younger officer turned pale. The older one's face became a grim mask. "This is a recovery operation now," he said into his radio, his voice tight. "We need forensics and a historical case file." October 78. The Miller family disappearance. While we waited downstairs, the older officer explained. The Millers had lived here. Parents and 2 daughters. They'd vanished on Halloween night, 1978. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. They'd just disappeared. The case had gone cold. The house had changed hands multiple times over the decades. Always sold quickly, always at a loss. There were always stories, the officer said, not meeting my eyes. Whispers. Cold spots. People said the youngest daughter, Agnes, was different. Interested in things she shouldn't be. But it was all chalked up to urban legend. Forensics arrived. They went up into the attic. Hours passed. Sarah joined me, her face ashen. We sat together on the bottom step of the stairs, holding hands, listening to the muffled sounds from above. Finally, the lead forensic tech came down. Her face was somber. "We found more than bones," she said quietly. "Behind the dirt floor. We found them. The whole family. It's not good. They had been walled and alive. Entombed in their own home." The tech looked at me, her eyes full of a profound pity. The Ouija board, it wasn't just there. It was used. Recently. The dust patterns, someone was using it, communicating with them, keeping them trapped, feeding on their energy. The real estate agent's words came back to me. The previous owners had to relocate suddenly. They hadn't relocated. They had been the ones playing the game. And when they left the players behind. and we had moved in, becoming the new curators of their nightmare. That night, back in the hotel, I couldn't sleep. The whispers were in my head now. They were clearer. They were thanking me for finding them, for setting them free. But one voice was different. It was a young girl's voice, sweet and cold as ice. "Thank you," it whispered in my mind. "The door is open now, but the game needs new players. It's so lonely here. Won't you stay and play with us?" And then I felt it. A cold, small hand slip into mine. I jerked my hand away with a strangled cry, scrambling back against the headboard of the hotel bed. The room was empty. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 3:03 a.m. Sarah slept soundly beside me, undisturbed. But the feeling of that small, icy hand was imprinted on my skin, a brand of cold fear. The voice was gone. The whispers had ceased. But the silence it left behind was somehow worse. It was the silence of a held breath. The silence of something waiting. We couldn't go back to the house. It was sealed off as a crime scene, a monument to a 40-year-old nightmare. We stayed in the hotel, shell-shocked, trying to process the horror we'd unknowingly been living in. The police kept us updated in terse, professional terms. The bodies had been identified as the Millers. The cause of death for all of them was dehydration and suffocation, consistent with being buried alive. The case was reopened, a cold case turned frozen solid. But the worst news came a week later. The lead detective called us, his voice stripped of its professional veneer, replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. "Forensics finished with the Ouija board," he said. "The prints on it, they're fresh. Recent." My blood ran cold. "The previous owners?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "No," the detective said, and the confusion in his voice curdled into something like fear. "That's the thing. The only prints on the planchette are yours." The world tilted. "That's impossible. I never touched it. I looked at it, but I never." "We know," the detective interrupted. "The video from your officer's body cam confirms you never made contact. But the prints are there, as clear as day, as if you'd been using it for hours." A cold dread, deeper than any I'd felt in the attic, began to seep into my bones. It wasn't just that the house was haunted. The haunting had attached itself to me. It had followed me out. That night, the dreams started. Vivid, suffocating dreams of being trapped in a small, dark space. The smell of damp earth filled my nostrils. I could hear the frantic scratching of nails against wood, the muffled sobs of my family just beyond the wall. I'd wake up gasping, my heart pounding, my sheets soaked with a cold sweat, the taste of dirt in my mouth. Sarah started to notice a change in me. I was jumpy, withdrawn. I'd find myself staring into space, tracing patterns on tables with my fingers, patterns that looked suspiciously like the letters on a Ouija board. "Ben, talk to me," she pleaded one morning, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "What's happening? The house is gone. We're safe now." But we weren't. I could feel it. Agnes wasn't in the house anymore. She was with me. The game wasn't over. It had just found a new board. The first physical manifestation happened at a coffee shop. I was waiting in line, trying to shake off the clinging fatigue from another nightmare. The barista handed me my change. As our fingers brushed, I felt that same, icy coldness. I flinched, dropping the coins. The barista, a young girl with pink hair and a nose ring, looked at me, startled. And then her expression changed. Her eyes, a bright blue, seemed to film over, becoming milky, vacant. Her face went slack. When she spoke, her voice was not her own. It was the voice of the little girl from my dreams. "Sweet, cold, ancient. You dropped your offering," she said, her lips moving in a clumsy parody of speech. "The game requires payment." She then smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched her face painfully. She pointed a finger at the coins on the floor. "Pick it up. The first move is yours." Then she blinked. The milky film vanished from her eyes. She shook her head slightly, as if clearing a fog. "Sorry," she said, her voice back to its normal, cheerful tone. "Zoned out for a sec. You okay?" I stumbled out of the coffee shop without my coffee, without my change. I leaned against the brick wall outside, hyperventilating. It wasn't a dream. It was real. Agnes could reach out. She could use people. She was inviting me to play. I refused. I fought it. I threw myself into the practicalities of insurance claims and finding a new place to live. I tried to act normal for Sarah, but the invitations kept coming. A child's hopscotch grid drawn in chalk on the sidewalk would suddenly rearrange its numbers into a sequence that spelled play in my mind. The radio in a passing car would blast a fragment of a song from the 70s, a song I later learned was the favorite of the eldest Miller daughter. The world itself was becoming a Ouija board, and Agnes was moving the planchette. The final invitation was delivered in our new temporary apartment. It was a package left at our door. No return address. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was the heart-shaped planchette from the attic. The glass in its center was no longer cloudy. It was clear, and in its depths, I could see a tiny, moving image, the secret room in the attic, from the inside, looking out. And a single, whispered word echoed in my mind, not from the outside, but from within my own skull. Checkmate. I stared at the planchette in my hands, the world narrowing to the tiny, moving image in the glass. It was a window, a live feed into the tomb I had opened. The dirt floor, the rough-hewn walls, it was all there, exactly as I'd seen it. But now, the perspective was from deep within the room, as if the viewer was sitting at that terrible table. The image shifted. The view swung slowly, panning across the room. It stopped on the far wall, on the etched family tree. The name Agnes seemed to glow with a faint, sickly light. The whispered word, checkmate, hung in the air, a declaration and a threat. The game wasn't an invitation anymore. It was a demand, and I had already lost the first round by simply engaging, by uncovering the room. Sarah found me like that, kneeling on the floor, clutching the wooden planchette, my face a mask of terror. "Ben, what is that? Where did it come from?" Her voice was sharp with alarm. She reached for it. "Don't," I shouted, snatching it away. The force of my reaction startled us both. I had to tell her. I had to make her understand that we weren't safe, that I wasn't safe. The words tumbled out of me. The prints on the board, the dreams, the barista, the hopscotch, the package. I showed her the image in the glass. She listened, her face pale, her hand over her mouth. When I finished, she didn't call me crazy. She didn't dismiss me. The horror in the attic had shattered our capacity for disbelief. "We have to get rid of it," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "We'll burn it. We'll throw it in the river. We'll..." As she spoke, the image in the planchette changed. The view of the room dissolved, replaced by a new image. It was our hotel room. It was a live feed of us, right now, from a high angle in the corner of the room. I could see the top of my head, see Sarah's horrified expression. Agnes wasn't just in the attic. She was here, with us, watching. Sarah let out a small, choked cry. The planchette wasn't just a window to the past. It was a surveillance device for the present. The image changed again. Now it showed our new temporary apartment. The moving boxes were stacked in the living room. The image zoomed in on one box, labeled kitchen. The cardboard flaps rustled, then pushed open from the inside. A small, pale hand emerged, followed by another. A little girl, her face obscured by shadows, began to crawl out of the box. She was coming through. The planchette was a door, and we had opened it by taking it inside. "You can't give back a gift," the little girl's voice whispered, this time from the planchette itself, tinny and distorted. "It's rude. Now it's your turn to play. Let's see if you can hide from me." The image in the glass vanished, replaced by a single, glowing word. Seek. The game of tag had begun, and we were it. We acted with a frantic, terrified energy. We shoved the planchette into a metal lockbox, then sealed the box with duct tape. We drove to the middle of a bridge and threw the box into the churning, dark water below. We watched it sink, a feeling of grim triumph washing over us. It was short-lived. When we returned to the apartment, it was waiting for us. On the kitchen table, the metal lockbox. It was perfectly dry. The duct tape was untouched. On the table next to it was a single, mud-stained child's shoe. It hadn't been there before. The box was no longer a prison. It was a homing beacon, and she had used it to come home. That night, the nightmares were no longer confined to my sleep. I was awake when the closet door in our bedroom creaked open by itself. I was awake when the small, muddy footprints appeared on the clean hardwood floor, leading from the closet to our bed. I was awake when I felt the weight of something small settling itself at the foot of our mattress. I lay there, paralyzed, listening to the sound of soft, childish humming. It was the same lullaby I'd heard in the attic whispers. Sarah was awake too. I could feel her trembling beside me. We didn't speak. We didn't move. We just waited for dawn, prisoners in our own bed. When the sun finally rose, the footprints were gone. The weight on the bed had vanished. But on Sarah's nightstand was a new drawing. A crude crayon picture of two stick figures lying in a bed. A third, smaller figure stood over them with a large, black smile. Scrawled at the bottom were the words, "I found you. Now you have to find me. Ready or not, here I come." The game was on, and the stakes were our very souls. We didn't call the police. What would we say? That a dead girl was playing a supernatural game of hide-and-seek with us? They'd commit us. We were on our own. The rules of the game became horrifyingly clear. Agnes would hide. We had to seek. If we refused, the consequences would escalate. The first time we ignored the whispered command to seek, all the power in the apartment went out, and the temperature dropped to near freezing. The second time, the walls bled a foul, brackish water that smelled of the grave. We had to play. It was the only way to maintain any semblance of control, to keep her contained to the rules of her own twisted game. Her hiding places were never physical. We wouldn't find her in a closet or under a bed. We had to seek her in reflections, in the static of a dead TV channel, in the patterns of rain on a window pane, in the depths of a still, dark pool of water in a glass. Finding her was its own kind of terror. Her face would materialize in the static, pale and accusing. She would mouth silent words that echoed directly into our minds. "You're getting warmer, colder, you'll never find me." The searches were mentally exhausting, a forced focus that left us with splitting headaches and a deep, spiritual nausea. The game was changing her, or perhaps it was changing us. With each round, her manifestations became stronger, more tangible. The cold spot that followed her became a physical chill that could leave frost on surfaces. The whispering became audible to others. A neighbor complained about the sound of a little girl crying through our walls. We were losing. The boundaries between her world and ours were eroding. Our apartment was becoming the new attic, a sealed tomb for a new set of players. The final round began with a new command, whispered from the sink drain as I brushed my teeth. "Hide." It was my turn. Agnes was now the seeker. The fear was paralyzing. How do you hide from an entity that can be in the walls, in the water, in your own mind? The rules were vague, maliciously so. We tried everything. Salt lines at the doors and windows. Prayer. But the salt would be scattered by an unseen wind. The words of prayer would twist themselves into nonsense in our mouths. I had a desperate idea. The one place she might not be able to follow. The one place that was the antithesis of her cold, earth and blood existence. Light. I waited until high noon, when the sun was at its peak. I threw open every curtain. I turned on every light in the apartment. I lit every candle we had. The apartment was blazing, an island of intense, brilliant light. I sat in the center of the living room, squinting in the glare, surrounded by a fortress of luminescence. Sarah held my hand, her grip tight. We waited. For an hour, nothing happened. The apartment was silent, hot, and bright. Hope, fragile and desperate, began to flicker in my chest. Then, the lights began to die. One by one, the overhead light fizzed and went out. The lamp in the corner dimmed to a dull orange glow before fading entirely. The candles snuffed out simultaneously, as if by a single, held breath. The sunlight coming through the windows didn't fade, it was absorbed. The light hitting the windows seemed to be sucked into the glass, leaving the panes black, opaque. Darkness fell, thick and absolute. In the utter blackness, a single light source remained. The planchette, on the kitchen table. It glowed with a faint, phosphorescent green light. The image in its glass was clear. It was a first-person view. It was from her perspective. She was in the room with us. She was moving through the darkness. I could see the faint outlines of our furniture from her low angle. She was walking past the couch. She was getting closer, ready or not. Her voice sang in the darkness, sweet and chillingly close. "Here I come." I could feel her breath on my neck. Cold, smelling of damp soil. I squeezed my eyes shut, a futile attempt to hide. Sarah's hand was ice-cold in mine. The singing stopped. The only sound was our ragged breathing. Then, a small, cold finger tapped me twice on the shoulder. "Tag," she whispered, her lips right against my ear. "You're it. Forever." The green light from the planchette went out. The darkness that followed was complete. And in that darkness, I felt the rules of reality rewrite themselves. The apartment fell away. The sensation of the floor beneath me changed to cold, packed earth. The smell of Sarah's perfume was replaced by the stench of rot and old blood. I opened my eyes. I was no longer in my apartment. I was sitting at the small, wooden table in the secret room in the attic. The Ouija board was in front of me. My hands were resting on the planchette. Across from me, Sarah sat, her eyes wide with a terror I knew was mirrored in my own. We were trapped. We had become the new players in the game, the permanent residents of the board. And from the darkness around us, from the walls that were now our world, we heard the faint, triumphant whispers of the Miller family. They were free. They had found new players to take their place. The game was over, and we had lost. The only light came from the planchette's glass center. It now showed a live feed of our old apartment. A new family was touring it, led by a smiling real estate agent. A young couple. They looked happy, hopeful. The woman turned and looked directly into the feed, as if she could see us. She smiled. "It's perfect," she said. "It has so much character." And from the darkness beside me, Agnes let out a soft giggle. "New game," she whispered. "Starting soon."